Each hospital was given a substantial amount of money for every COVID death. So they had huge incentive to code every death as COVID. AOC was giving families money to bury people for COVID death, provide huge incentive for each family to make sure it was a COVID death to get the $4,000 for burial rights.
What was their agenda? Were we manipulated or just misled? Who profited from the pandemic? What else aren't they telling us?
One thing you can't deny is we get great guests.
Once I got a book deal and started doing podcasts, we're like, oh, he's actually not crazy.
Today we have Ed Dowd, formerly of BlackRock, now partner of Phinance Technologies, author of the book Causes Unknown.
You got to understand, there's trillions of dollars of vested interests that don't want to see COVID or COVID vaccines in the forefront. They want to memory all this. It was one of the biggest propaganda campaigns we've ever seen in our whole lives.
I want to talk a little bit about tariffs. Do you have any opinions on A, where they're going to land, and B, are they as serious an inflationary threat as everyone but me seems to think?
The mainstream media wants to paint it as inflationary. What's going to happen is the dollar is going to get stronger and other countries are going to base their currency to make whatever tariff moot. I'm bullish long-term on bonds in 10 years. Do I think home prices are going to appreciate as a result? No. That's part of the reason why we're going to go into an economic downturn.
Welcome back to the Future's Edge. I am Jim Iuorio. That's Bob Iaccino. Before I introduce our guests, I want to say thank you to you guys. This show, it's beyond the success that we had it pegged for, and it's because of you guys, all the DMs, all the retweets. Thank you guys very much. Special thanks to our sponsors, Hardcore Italians. If you haven't been on the website, go on the website. Use our promo code, which is FU, which stands for Finance Unfiltered, by the way. I don't know what you guys are thinking. Also, our other sponsors, Independence Arc Farm in Arkansas. The meat is unbelievable. You will love it. Thank you guys very much. Remember our story, Bobby and I were in legacy media for 20 years. All of a sudden, we realized we couldn't say what we thought because of overzealous producers or sponsors. We might be full of shit, but we are honest full of shit. And one thing you can't deny is we get great guests. Today, we have Ed Dowd, formerly of BlackRock, now partner of Phinance Technologies, author of the book Causes Unknown. And before anyone suggests for a second that these finance guys should stay in their lane, we're going to, one, go tell you to go fuck yourself, and I'll tell you why. For years, the finance industry has attracted the best researchers, the best analysts, and the best data collectors in the world. To think that someone like Ed can branch off and dedicate his brain power to vaccine injuries, things like that, to us is perfectly credible. Anyway, Ed, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here today, guys. Thank you.
Good. And a lot of times, as you guys know, our show can be light and funny. We're going to talk about some serious shit today, so it might not be quite as light and funny as normal. Bobby?
Still might be funny. I mean, because like we're just going to rip each other like we always
like
do.
we normally
That
do.
part might be funny. Ed, I want to jump in with something real quick because it's so timely that has very little to do with what Jim just introduced. I want to talk a little bit about tariffs, if you don't mind. Do you have an opinion on what tariffs are going to be? So first of all, a lot of us said before Trump was inaugurated that you should take him seriously, but not literally. And he's already pushed back the start date of tariffs to February 1st. He announced that yesterday when he was signing, I think it was 10 million executive orders. And he said that I'm looking at 25%, maybe starting February 1st. Do you have any opinions on A, where they're going to land, and B, are they as serious an inflationary threat as everyone but me seems to think?
I don't think they're inflationary at all. I think we saw this during the first Trump administration. It's art of the deal. He starts off way with outrageous positioning, and then he brings people to the middle. This is a negotiating tool, and it's just a start. And the markets last night, when I saw the announcement, I checked the futures. They dipped 60 basis points immediately, and then they came right back because Wall Street's hip to what he's doing. I think the mainstream media wants to paint it as inflationary, and there's other things going on. Let's say he does impose some tariffs. What's going to happen is the dollar is going to get stronger, and other countries are going to, debase their currency to make whatever tariff moot. So it's a negotiating tool. I think he can do a certain amount of goods on his own, but I think he needs congressional approval for a lot more. So it's just kind of a cudgel.
So two things real quick. Number one, I disrespectfully said everybody but me. Jimmy never thought they were going to be that
I
inflationary.
think he's angling toward freer trade, and he's using it as a cudgel, as I just said. But anyway.
Yeah, totally agree. So when you talk about what the effect was, are you saying that's why we got the two consecutive drops in the dollar index, for example, and the big drop in crude oil? I credit to sort of the panic by foreign governments to hurry up and buy oil, hurry up and buy copper, anything else. Well, we don't produce a lot of copper, but anything else they needed to buy on the U.S. market, they were sort of hoarding, right? Now they're kind of just easing back, going, okay, he's not that serious.
Yeah, and the markets reacted quickly, and the futures came back, and we opened green today. Look, I'm just not that worried. Look, during the first Trump administration, day traders hated him because they would screw up their positioning because he would come up with an announcement. But ultimately, long-term investors, can be hopeful that he's going to put the economy on the right track. Near term, we put out a report suggesting that there's going to be a potential recession coming this year, and it has to happen. Actually, it would be proof that he's restructuring the economy. If you see government spending accelerate, trying to hold this asset bubble up, then he's not really working for us.
Yeah, there's no question. And I can picture a scenario, which, by the way, I don't know if you know Bobby and I's background too. We're futures traders for the last 35 to 40 years. My focus has been mostly interest rates. His has been mostly oil. But we, of course, because we're know-it-alls, we think like we know everything about every asset because that's just the way we operate. But I just wrote a piece a second ago saying, I do not think Trump's day-to-day words are going to have the same market moving punch as they did in his first term. I think we're kind of immune to it. Do you agree, Ed?
I agree with that because people do have a history to go on. And I think the volatility from his comments are going to be much more subdued. He really did. Futures traders were whipped around when he first came on the scene. But I think people know now his style, that he, waves a big stick, but doesn't start. He's not going to do the draconian first move.
So before we get into some of the other stuff, Twitter asked you some questions, Ed, when Jim tweeted out today. Yeah, Twitter did.
Why, by the way, the only reason I tweeted that is not to get the knuckleheads questions. I love you guys. You're not knuckleheads. I just wanted Ed to remember he was on the show, so I wanted to tag him on Twitter. That's the way we operate.
No, he remembered. He shot me an email that he was very happy that I was excited about the show and not much else. Jimmy put it out there that you were coming on the show, and we had two questions these were serious questions, so I wanted to get to them. One of them was from Sunday Red. By the way, also, so Ed, this will be out in like 10-ish days, so you don't have to decide what's going to happen tomorrow. Sunday Red wanted to know what direction you saw the 10-year yield going in, and if we'll see a steep move down that would lead to housing appreciation. That seemed like a talking his own book kind of a question.
Well, our U.S. economic report is predicting a recession, and the markets aren't discounting that yet. We'll see more evidence as we roll through and get the economic revisions. I think, personally, when this becomes apparent, and there's also, we think, a global slowdown as well, so it's going to be synchronous. The 10-year and the 30-year, if you're speculators, are going to be great buys. And I'm not going to call the exact bottom. I mean, we could do a double bottom on the 30-year from the I think it was October 23 low. I'm bullish long term on bonds and 10 years. Do I think home prices are going to appreciate as a result? No. That's part of the reason why we're going to go into an economic downturn. Housing is on shaky, stagnant ground right now, and we see in our report that we're selling to institutions and RIAs and whatnot, we get into detail why we think the housing market's poised to go down. We look at a lot of economic indicators and leading indicators.
Is part of your analysis and thesis, like I've been arguing for 2 years that the labor market is mostly trash being masqueraded as good over a 2-year span. Do you think there has to be a crack in the labor market, or just an unveiling that every freaking job we've added in 2 years has been a side hustle Uber driver job? What do you think?
It's been immigration. The illegal immigration is the elephant in the room. We've never in the country's history let in 10 to 15 million people in such a short period of time. Net legal migration annually is 1 million people. So that's why the household survey and the establishment survey got out of whack. They've been low-end jobs. We assume a certain amount of the illegal immigrants took some jobs, but there's been no real net job creation that's been any good that people can go buy homes and goods on. So you saw the BLS revise the payroll numbers down to 850,000 in September. There was obviously some statistical nonsense going on with non-farm payroll for the election year. We're going to see more of that in February when the QCEW comes out. That's the book report for the BLS, non-farm payroll. You guys, my whole career, I've never cared about that report, but the discrepancy's gotten so wide, you have to look at it now.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys are traders. Like book reports are useless, and I had to people are like, "What's a QCEW?" As the asset manager guys, and well, now we have to look at it because there might have been some statistical, errors or fraud, whatever you want to call it.
So speaking of looking at things that we always looked at but didn't pay as close attention to it, how auctions went off. The auctions, it was always in a pretty narrow band of how longer term debt auctions went off. Over the last, let's call it year, maybe 18 months, there's been a solid 5 of them that have been disappointing as hell. So my question is that, can you foresee, let's say for a second that the recession doesn't happen or it happens in 2026. But for this year, I think that we could be running bigger deficits because the supply side, his supply side solutions won't kick in till after his lowering corporate taxes. So tax receipts could be down before the economy really responds. I foresee a situation where the globe might still buy our bonds if they believe we're getting our fiscal situation cleaned up. And it won't be this thing where we have to worry about who's going to buy them. Do you think that scenario is plausible at all?
Yeah, so I was talking to some people in the asset management world, and there's a lot of debate going on. I think if Trump can signal and show he's restructuring the economy and serious about taking care of the deficit, the bonds will be bought by foreign investors. Not only that, a recession will cause a reallocation out of risky assets into U.S. Treasury. So if Bessent wants to reterm out all the stuff that Yellen put on the short end, you do it in a recession because, the 10-year will be, 480 right now? It'll be 3. You do it then.
People will buy our bonds if the recession happens.
And there'll be a rush to safety. So I think it's a win-win.
So before I get back to a question from Twitter, there's one more that was a serious question. Everything else was pretty, not important. You guys are predicting recession. So I was having a personal conversation with somebody who asked me why after the longest and deepest inversion of the yield curve, let's use the 2s, 10s as an example, was there no recession? And my answer in that particular context was the recessions, going back to 1950, have always started after the curve is normalized.
Correct. I'm with you on that.
Was that any part of your thesis at all? Or are you seeing something else? Because that to me was just the very easy answer. Now we're back to what, positive 40, Jimmy, somewhere around there in the 2s.
Yeah, the normalization of the yield curve after a period of inversion, it's not a timing tool, but it's a signal that a recession is closer than it was when it was inverted. We made a call in 2023 that we were going to go, we have economic early cycle indicators that have worked phenomenally for decades. We were indicating a recession at the end of 23, beginning of 24. It never happened. We're putting out this report now because we understand why it didn't happen. And it was fiscal dominance and immigration. And that's all going to reverse out under Trump. It was never sustainable because you can't run crisis level deficits, to get presidents elected. I mean, think about it. We were running 8% of GDP deficits that we had in the great financial crisis. What was the crisis? The crisis was to get the Biden administration elected, and they did it through government jobs, illegal immigration.
Crazy. Yes.
And people don't understand, illegal immigration was a big part of the economic juice. You got to think about all the NGOs. This is a huge logistical endeavor. Money was spent to get these people in here and provide homes for, accommodation. That's been holding up the housing market. That's all going away. It's all going away.
So
and it doesn't even need to go away. Just the second derivative needs to. All it has to do is the flow has to stop. That's it. You guys get that.
Yeah, I have to point out before I go back to Jimmy that research was done by my partner Mike Arnold. I didn't know that innately. Mike Arnold's the one who pointed it out to me. So I just want to point that out and not take credit for that, Jimmy.
So just Ed, when you would hear these left-leaning economists, which it doesn't make any sense to me how an economist could ever have a lean if it's a real science, but the Jason Furmans, the Stephen, whatever that guy's name is. But anyway, they talk about this great economy and never mention the $36.4 trillion elephant in the room. The fact that they're accruing debt like drunken sailors. It boggles my mind. Did you want to jump through the TV and strangle them, or is it just my violent tendency?
No, I knew once we figured out what was going on, we knew that they were going to goose it through the election. And in fact, after the election, they even accelerated the spend. They left Besson and Trump a spiked cannon. Yeah. They really did.
No doubt about it. And like you said, they sucked up all the demand, well, not all of it yet, at the short end, and they're going to leave it out to the long end to see what's going to happen. So actually, the only way, you are starting to convince me that a recession really is the only way out of it. And obviously the dominoes are there if they're really going to start cutting spending now and cutting. All they have to do, like you said, is turn it down a little bit, and things will happen. Well, where do you about equity markets? Are you guys mostly involved in the interest rate area?
No, I mean we're looking to eventually start a hedge fund. It's a futures hedge fund, macro driven by it's quant, but the fundamental drivers are economic fundamentals, and so it's going to be a risk off period. And we think rates are going lower. I mean, everyone said the Fed lowered interest rates to goose the markets for Biden. That's not true. They lowered interest rates because they're starting to see something. And they were chasing the 3-month T-bill, which was ahead of them. We all know this. The 3-month T-bill leads them. And I expect the 3-month T-bill to start leading them again.
So I'm going to save this other Twitter question, Jimmy, if I could, because it is a vax question. So I'll save it till we get to that. But I do have one.
I want to talk about.
Yeah, I know you do. I know you do. I have another economic question before we
go, Bob. You go your economic question.
Yeah, and
sometimes we don't always agree yet on what we want to talk about.
Allow people to listen to this part, and then you can announce the vax part. They can tune out if they want to tune out. I don't know. But this particular question that I have is, I can point to a lot of stuff that is positive about the economy right now in terms of adding to potential inflation. Well, that's one of them, right? I think inflation is ramping back up. I personally see that in, 6-month annualized inflation tracking well above the Fed's target. So maybe they're okay with that. The optimism indexes, the small business optimism index, some of the localized Fed reports like the Philly Fed had a huge jump. So is there anything that's not revealing what you guys look at, not revealing any of the secret sauce that points to the recession for you guys other than maybe the normalization of the yield curve?
I know we see lots of other things. I mean, I mentioned the immigration is the elephant in the room. You're going to, starting in February, we're going to get economic revisions. And that, that's been cooked into the books. The Biden administration kind of padded the numbers. I think that the third quarter GDP we saw, that number is going to be revised down. So the trade market is real interest rates are around 1.5% to 2%. Money's tight. M2 is going down globally. The only game in town was government credit, and it was fiscal domination. If you look at private credit, I mean, we're seeing the signposts, consumer credit card delinquencies, auto loan delinquencies. The only thing that's been holding up the housing market is, again, people who own multiple properties renting to, whoever that is supported by the illegal. So we're going to see that. And if you look at home sales, there's not a lot of transactions. And there's a lot of supply. So we look at supply, starts, permitting. These things are all not going in the right direction.
So let me ask you, when Trump took office in 2016, he was handed what most people would say was a fairly decent economy. It was an old economy. It was long in the tooth. It was an old recovery, right? And I give him credit for extending that. I mean, you look at that and you say, okay, this was one of the longest bull markets in history. And he extended that, which I think a lot of administration would not have been able to do with tax cuts and things like that. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But my real question is, being handed the economy that you see, Trump's not going to like a recession. He's going to get mad at it. And do you think he has the ability to get us out of that recession, let's say before the midterms, if it happens before the midterms, or throughout his 4-year terms? Does he have the ability to get us out of that without stoking inflation again?
Well, if you look back at the 2014 through 16 Obama economy, the stock market was not really doing a whole lot. And it was due to a lot of onerous regulations. Trump's first order of business when he got in there was to deregulate tax cuts. So that prevented the economy from rolling over and really juiced the middle class. And if you look at the middle class, their real wages went up under Trump. They declined under Biden, and the rich got richer. Their percent of financial assets owned went up dramatically. So this is a different backdrop, though.
Right.
Trump's being handed record high stock valuations, interest rate cycle where we know, as you guys are investors, rate cut cycles after a period of yield curve inversion don't necessarily yield great results for risk assets. They do in the beginning. Historically, the first rate cut or two, everybody takes stocks to new highs. Not always. That didn't happen in 2000. In 2000, they started cutting rates after the March 2000 top, and it just kept going down. But in 08, they were cutting rates in 07 before the stock market topped. And the same, I think, in 2019 going into 2020. So this is not interest rate cuts after, the Fed took us from 0 to 5.5%. And money supply shrank. Now, money supply effects take 18 months to 24 months to, get into the economy. So M2 went negative in November of 22. 18 months was May of 24. We're there.
So you mentioned M2 before, and you said M2 contracting. But over the last 18 months, our M2 has been expanding actually at a pretty high rate. But I assume you meant that it's not going to keep expanding now that we've handed the reins over to someone else. Is that what you meant?
Well, M2 went negative year-over-year growth. It did bounce. A lot of it was due to velocity of money. And the velocity of money was juiced by immigrants, letting 10 to 15 million people and handing them money that then they put into the economy.
That makes sense. Yeah, that 4.6% contraction in M2 money supply, which I believe is the biggest in history. And never before has it been over 2 cents where a depression didn't follow. So that was interesting to me that we could thread that needle. But again, we had a government that was willing to use MMT despite the fact that they know that it's running potential risks. Is there anything wrong with that thesis?
No, there isn't. I mean, look, what they did was criminal. They ran crisis level deficits to bring in 10 to 15 million new voters at the expense of society, tranquility, chaos. I mean, this is why Trump just announced a national emergency at the border. He was elected because of the economy and that.
Yeah. Well, I actually, and I've been very vocal about this. I think the notion of trying to deport 15 million people seems quite silly to me. I think, again, these people, many of them are caught in the crosshairs. I think you should just tighten up crime fighting in major urban areas and just hopefully these people will assimilate. Am I an idiot? Am I naive for thinking that?
I don't think he's going to deport 15 million people. I think they're going to target the criminals and
that's fine, I guess, if it works.
That's what Holman has actually said over and over again. As he said, we're going to focus on criminals.
Yeah, and I think all it's going to take, though, for this momentum to fade in the immigration game for the economy is just a halting of it, a second derivative. I mean, it needs constant growth. I mean, to go from 1 million net migration to 10 to 15 million over 4 years, most of which was in the last 2, that's a big momentum shift. And we're going to start seeing it sometime this year.
Do you think they intentionally, and I do want to change channels to your book and to the vax, and because I think it's amazing, but do you think this was intentional, done just to keep themselves in power, or to potentially just light the fuse and pass it over to the other guys so they can point their fingers for the next 4 years?
It's unclear, but there was definitely, obviously Biden wasn't running anything. This was some sort of administrative state plan. It's unclear as to why they did it, but it's certainly, you could say it was to change the voting character of the country. It was a replacement population. It was to goose the economy because they know that we have a demographic problem, but now we don't.
Yeah, right.
I have 2 statements and then a Twitter question. Number 1, I actually have empathy for Joe Biden as a person. Maybe not as what he was before. Do you remember
what he was before Joe Biden when he was sharp? I like to punch that guy. But go on. Yeah,
I don't have sympathy for what he was before they did what they did to him. But having taken care of a father who passed away from Parkinson's, I have a ton of empathy when I see him sort of shuffling around and stuff. It just bothers me, like that we didn't have a government or a power structure that could go after him when he did know what he was doing. I'm telling you, at least the 3 years, at least the last 3 years, I saw the same signs I saw with my dad, and I'm waiting for the announcement that he's been diagnosed with Parkinson's, and the whole thing is going to come down, crashing down. The second thing is, and you could tell me, Ed, that I'm naive here, I kind of have sympathy for doctors with what went on with the vaccine and some of the COVID stuff, because I feel like, and some of the nutrition stuff that we've talked about on this show as well, that I don't think we're going to get into. But I want to ask this question from the Krankensteckler, which I think is hilarious. I don't even know what that means. Does Edward think the COVID vax will be widely recognized and as unsafe by the public and the mainstream media in 1 year, 2 years, or never?
So that's the $1 million question. You got to understand there's trillions of dollars of vested interests that don't want to see COVID or COVID vaccines in the forefront. They want to memory hold this. We had basically the whole pharmaceutical industry in on it, the medical industry, the tech industry with the censorship regime, the media got paid off. Then you had Fortune 500 companies mandate this stuff. So the liability is massive. So there's a whole vested $1 trillion of industry that want to see this just go away. But if you want to heal the country and heal people, there needs to be an admission that A, they're not only ineffective, they can cause serious problems. So a lot of people are presenting themselves to doctors, wondering what's going on. The doctor treat the symptoms. If they knew it was the spike protein, maybe they could address it. But there's no widespread media discussion of this. It's only for people that search out the information and are in the alternative space. So I'm hopeful that Bobby Kennedy will release the CMS data that can prove once and for all something changed in 2021 that took us on a course of excess disabilities, deaths, and all sorts of strange maladies. Again, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm hopeful. If we hear no discussion of the mRNA vaccine, or as of now, it should have been pulled years ago. Again, there's this reason we're not doing it. And if Trump doesn't do it, then I'm just going to assume a deal was made behind the doors that we're just going to forget about this.
So am I naive for not necessarily being upset with individual physicians, number one? And then number two, was Trump smart to pull us out of the WHO in one of his early executive orders?
Oh, absolutely smart. That whole organization is just a totalitarian, power-grabbing arm of, the one world global, whatever you want to call it. I mean, they wanted, look, it's classic money, power, and greed. You don't even need to be a conspiracy theorist on it. This is just classic. So getting out of that, they got everything wrong. The WHO got everything wrong, just literally everything. So we pull out of that. That's great. Should we be mad at doctors? Look, here's the problem. Doctors go to medical school. They don't go to school on drug statistics. So when the FDA puts its rubber stamp on it, they assume it's good. So a lot of doctors, unfortunately, with the FDA blessed it, they just said, sounds good to me. Others who knew about science came forward, but they were censored, mocked, and not listened to. So a lot of the doctors who didn't have access to that information or didn't look for it, maybe you can forgive them or not get too mad at them, but the ones who actively work to suppress the truth, those are the people I have issues with.
Yeah,
that's fair.
So I will not be forgiving them, Bobby. And you know what my history was. I was under contract with a major financial station. We like to call it the TMZ of finance. And as the shit was hitting the fan, they started singling out people who weren't going to comply with their nonsense doctrine and were still going to continue saying what they actually believed on TV, and they got rid of us. I'm glad. I'm sorry. I cannot, if I'm going to be an opinion journalist, opinion financial analyst, I'm going to give my opinion. So, sorry to these doctors too. If you caved because you were worried about your license, but you knew the truth, I'm kind of still a little mad at you. I'm not saying that everyone should be fired, whatever, too. There's a question I want to talk about.
Just so you know, most of my empathy is for like the doctor I go and see when I have nausea that I can't figure out. That doctor, I mean, I just can't get mad at them for that. I can get mad at CNBC enough to name them and say their shit.
Sure.
So, but go ahead. I was on that as well, but anyway.
Here, I want to talk about
the psychology
of it real quick before we get to the hard data that you did for your book, which I think is fascinating. This was May of 2020, and I was having a small party at my house, probably about 20 people there, and we're just all talking, listening. And I said said, listen, I'm pretty sure there's a pandemic going on. I remember it was May of 2020. And all of a sudden the room got real quiet. One friend, one of my daughters, like, what do you mean you're pretty sure? I said, just what I said. I mean, this is the government, pharma, and the media. All three institutions that I have almost zero trust in are the only people who are giving me data on this. And I do not believe them. My question then is going to be, how did they put that message, that propaganda, that guys like us were such the rarity that we were like, nah, I still got questions. It's just amazing to me. It's baffling. How did this work?
It was one of the biggest propaganda campaigns we've ever seen in our whole lives. And it was a unified global message. When was the last time you ever saw global governments agree on the same messaging ever?
Never.
That's
Never.
crazy.
So there was something creepy and weird about that. It just the censorship began. I remember Zero Hedge said, "Hey, there's a university in India that said that this thing may have had gain of function." That they were blown off Twitter, they were blown off Facebook, they were blown off everything. They just got blown up, and I was like, "Why are we censoring zero?" Like, whenever like you put your foot down on something, I want to know what it is. I can't talk about that. No, I'm going to talk about it. That's just my nature. I mean, we're finance guys. They're like, we're on Wall Street. You telling us we can't talk about what is this nonsense?
Yeah,
and you got constantly. I'm sure you got that appeal to authority fallacy over and over and over again. When people saying, "Where's your medical degree? Where's your medical degree?" I can read data.
Yeah, quite well. Yeah.
Yeah. No, look, the reason I entered the debate is, unfortunately, I entered it a little later than I would have liked, but I needed evidence. So I had a thesis in 2021, early 21, that the vaccine was a shit show and a disaster. Excuse my French.
Are you kidding? This is Futures Unfiltered. Our call sign is FU. Go.
Okay. All right, cool. So I noticed, I live on Maui. First of all, on the island of Maui during 2020, I personally did not know anybody who got COVID. No one. Then comes 2021, everyone starts getting the vaccine, they start getting COVID. I hear all these weird things happening. People, so I was very suspicious. I didn't take it because I knew it was experimental. I knew warp speed was a little dubious, and I knew it took 7 to 10 years for vaccines to get tested because of my Wall Street background. A lot of us know these things, right? And so I started getting suspicious. Then the vaccine mandates came, and that's when I said something super weird is going on here. Dr. Malone came to the island, and I said, look, I think the vaccine's a disaster. I'm hearing anecdotes. Statistically, if it's safe, I shouldn't be hearing anything. Just that's how the math works. So I said, I'm going to watch insurance company results and funeral home results. And sure enough, insurance companies had losses in their group life business, and funeral homes were taken off. I mean, and then I hooked up with the guys at Phinance Technologies, my partner Carlos Allegra, a PhD physicist and also a PhD in finance. And we just started doing math and looking for signals, and we saw statistical signals everywhere. Disabilities, disabilities like this in the U.S. were 30 million for 4 years going into 2020. Then in February of 21, it goes like this: 3 standard deviation change a trend. You guys are chart guys. You buy it. You don't try to figure out why it's going up. You buy it first, do the research later.
Yeah. Can I ask a quick question about Moderna? And this was one of the craziest psychological things ever. Like you said, we've been looking at these pharma companies forever. And the people, it was like a shell game. They just shoved Moderna in there, and they'd be like, yeah, Pfizer, Eli Lilly, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna. And everyone's would repeat them like, Moderna, what the hell is Moderna? I've never heard of Moderna. It seems like they just popped on the scene with, okay, we got mRNA vaccines ready. And all of a sudden their stock went to the moon. To me, something really odd and nefarious is just that part of the story. Yes?
Yeah, it's actually worse than that. So I was not, when I was at BlackRock, I was the large cap growth portfolio manager, but I was also the tech analyst and the energy analyst. I had a healthcare analyst working for me. So I was dual role PM analyst. So I started calling my friends in the healthcare world, still on Wall Street. I go, what is Moderna? And then they said it's a serial capital raiser, biotech, speculative SAC capital stock trading vehicle that never has ever had a product, and they failed every clinical trial they've ever posted. I'm like, and then I heard the CEO is a serial liar. He's a scumbag. So I heard this before the vaccine was on. When I heard Moderna was involved, all of us on Wall Street who knew anything were like, why is this serial capital burning, raising biotech thing even involved? And then you look deeper and all the rats died in every one of their studies. Every time they try to issue something, but all of a sudden, miraculously during this approval.
Okay, so here's a question. And if you, again, I've been canceled before. I frankly welcome it again each time I've been canceled, which is once. I've felt freer. I was asked the other day, I was talking to friends, and I said, no, I don't believe there was a pandemic in 2020. I just don't believe there was. I'm not even 100% convinced there was a novel virus called COVID-19, although there probably was. Where do you fall on that?
I believe there was a novel virus, but it wasn't that serious, because I'll say this. So I live on Maui, and whatever they called COVID was here in October of 2019, because everybody...
Zero question of that. It was on the trading floor too. But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go on.
Yeah, no. So there were people all around me getting sick, not dying, but getting something they couldn't shake. It was this like breathing issues and like this coughing up phlegm, but no one died, no one panicked, because as one 80-year-old veteran, Vietnam veteran told me, he lived on Maui 50 years. He goes, every 5 years we get some strange crap virus from Asia. So I just assumed it was that. No one panicked. No one I heard of died. People got over it. They were fine. Then we were told to be afraid, and then people were afraid. That's what I mean. No one knew.
What's interesting to me, just as a statement, is how long the censorship went on. We had Dr. Robert Malone on this show late February of 2023. And they still had warnings on that show on Spotify. They took it down on YouTube when we first put it up. This was 2023. I mean, this was like 2 years after the heart of it was still happening. And he told us at that time that he still wasn't able to get back on any of the social media, and it was still being blocked by so much of the mainstream media 2 years later. And I couldn't believe it. His book specifically, The Lies My Government Told Me, is the name of the book. I have it here, and it was just too technical to get through. So I kind of personally want to thank you for your book, which wasn't that. I mean, there was tons and tons of data, but the average person could buy Cause Unknown, and you'd be able to read it and understand it. It wouldn't be a big deal at all.
Well, yeah, we haven't plugged it enough. We're great at selling books, by the way. People have told us that before. Cause Unknown by Edward Dowd. You guys get it. It is fabulous. Anyway, sorry, Bobby.
Yeah. No, it's okay. So I wanted to ask you so I got the vaccine, my wife didn't. And it's weird. My wife is the most non-political person you'll ever meet. She knows who the president and vice president is. And if you ask her opinion, she's like, can we talk about something else? It's just the direction she goes in. And when the vaccine was being forced on people like me, I did 1 and I did 2, and then I was not doing it anymore. She asked me, she goes, are we going to have a fight in our house if I don't get it? I'm like, no, absolutely not. If I didn't have to get it, I wouldn't, because this thing just doesn't scare me. I mean, I'm not young, but I'm in fairly good shape and I feel strong and I'm not worried about it itself. And the difference between when she caught it and when I caught it was she got over it quicker than I did. And this was
negative efficacy. I was going to get to that. Yes.
Yeah. She got over it quicker than I did. And the interesting thing was I got my shot probably 3 or 4 weeks before she caught COVID. We both caught it in Chicago. We live in Southwest Florida. We went to visit Chicago and we both caught it, which Southwest Florida was not very vaccinated. Chicago was very vaccinated. We both caught it there, visiting friends and family, came back with it. She was over it in 10 days. It was 2 weeks, and probably 6 weeks after that, I felt after effects. These are familiar stories to you, are they not?
Yeah, so there's a contingent. My kids got vaccinated. My ex-wife did. My dad did, my brother did. So I was the only holdout. And now, after I started becoming more known for my work, everybody in my family said, we're done. Once I got a book deal and started doing podcasts, they're like, oh, he's actually not crazy. It's social proof. That people need social proof, right? So I agree with you. So all my friends on the island who are unvaccinated, we get COVID. It's not a big deal. We don't get it that often, but when we do, it's like a head cold. The people who are vaccinated get walloped. So there's definitely negative efficacy. There's some study in Japan that just came out showing this. So the science is following in the steps of the Anecdotes, And I think there was a Cleveland Clinic study that also proved negative efficacy. So there's more and more of these being done. And, anecdotally, you can just, the unvaxxed people seem to be okay when they get COVID. I'm not saying it's dire if you're vaxxed, but it seems to linger a little longer. It's a pain in the ass. It takes you out.
And that's the number one thing I want to point out to people, that myself, Jim, and I believe Ed, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we're not saying it doesn't suck when you get it. I don't want people to think that we're saying, you get it and it's no big deal. You cough a little, you could still go to work. We're not saying that at all. It sucks as a flu, right? But that's really what it is. It's a really bad flu.
Yeah. And again, there are some people, look, flus mostly affect old people. That's where all the excess mortality, that's where a flu season takes out comorbidities in old people, generally speaking. Before COVID, flu season globally would wipe 500,000 people annually off the planet.
So here's a question.
Were you ever on with Brett Weinstein yet or no?
Yeah, I did the Dark Horse podcast. I went over my estimates for the U.S. what happened since the excess mortality since the vaccination program, and made some back of the envelope estimates for the globe. I'm lower than some of the bombastic numbers, but we have a range for global excess deaths. We're between 8 and 15. Dennis Rancourt is 17. So, we're there. But I mean, look, it's a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people.
The reason I asked that question, Jimmy, is because Brett uses Ed's numbers for excess deaths now because he thinks they're within the range of conservative, is one of the things he called them.
I agree too, but let's poke holes in it just to tighten it up a little bit. What if people come to you and say, one, it's because of long COVID is why the excess deaths. Two, it's deaths of despair that still linger from opportunities lost over 2 years of lockdowns, whatever it was, addiction, which has gone through the roof. Can you possibly tease out those things to tighten up your number or no?
I don't believe long COVID is a thing, by the way. But
no, neither do I. I'm just saying, where are the holes in where are they going to come and say you're wrong, Ed?
Well, so, factually, 1.2 million Americans died between 21 and 23. We didn't do 24 numbers yet because thank God it's come down a little bit. We're still running excess mortality around 5 to 10%. But so 1.2 million Americans died, and we think it's the vaccine primarily because in 2020 mostly old people died. Then there was a mix shift to young, so that's weird. There's no virus that ever goes after young. So Carlos, my resident genius, thinks of that 1.2 million, 80% are due to the vaccines.
It's believable to me completely.
70 to 80%.
Yeah. Here's a question.
And then the disabilities are run 4 to 1 versus so for every one excess death, we got 4 disabilities. So, and they all started inflecting during the vaccine. So long COVID should have appeared in 2020. Why February 21?
Yeah, no doubt about it. By the way, I apologize. I've been interrupting today, but I'm getting so excited about this topic. I'd like to apologize, but I really think this is a fascinating topic. There's something that I was kind of beating the drum on, and nobody seems to believe this is real. Everybody knows how powerful a tool the mind is, particularly as it relates to illness. I remember at the beginning of it, and I had an older mother and my in-laws. To me, it seemed like one of the worst possible things we could have been doing for that 6-month period from March through, whatever of 2020, telling people like, oh my God, you have COVID. You know what I mean? Like that does something mentally to you, and that can affect your immune system. Do you think that's a reasonable, I assume you think, well, yeah, there's some truth to that, but was there enough truth to that to make it matter?
I actually think there's a lot of truth to that. Look, I personally suffered from anxiety and mild depression, and it screwed up my immune system. And fear running amok does things to your body. And when you're constantly in fear and you're anxious, it's definitely going to contribute to your immune system. And again, I go back to we are told it's going to kill us on Maui in October, November, December of 2019. No one was freaking out. No one knew they should be afraid, so they weren't.
Right. Yeah. And that's, to me, it would have been a much better thing. Which, by the way, my mom died of COVID, whatever the hell that means. She was 95 years old. When the hospital told us that, all of us started laughing. You know what I mean? She had fallen, broken her shoulder. Like, Jesus Christ, you're going to get your 17 grand for calling her a COVID death? Whatever, have at it. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the other problem. The incentive. You show me the incentive, I'll show you the result. The incentives were perverse.
By the way, so when I look at the incentive structure that was set up immediately, and I might be forgetting some too, but is that each hospital was given, I think it was close to 17,000 can't be right, but a substantial amount of money for every COVID death. So they had a huge incentive to code every death as COVID. The AOC was giving families money to bury people for COVID death, provide huge incentive for each family to make sure it was a COVID death to get the $4,000 for burial rights. Was there any other thing, or am I missing some?
No, you're not missing anything. On our website at financetechnologies.com with a PH, we did a paper. We analyzed. It was very, very clever. Multiple causes of death versus, cause of death, flu versus COVID, and there were flu deaths during COVID. We proved that there was probably 70% through math, clever math, 70% over-reporting of COVID deaths.
Yeah. And when you think, you go, Bob. Yeah.
Is there any way in your data where somebody, let's say I know somebody who had a stroke or some other adverse, a fairly healthy person, early 50s, just to make something up, and they had a stroke they were shocked by, right? Never been sick, never really had any health issues. Is there some way for a person who was vaccinated to say, I think I can tie this to the vaccine, not for a lawsuit or anything, just for sort of peace of mind?
Well, we have on our website, we analyze the U.S. disability data is the BLS. It's not granular, but the U.K. system, it's got something, the Personal Independence Payment System. So we showed that new claims took off for all sorts of disorders. So if someone you could point them to that part of the website and say, look, you can see here in the UK, disability claims shot up starting here for strokes. For almost every
would it do? Otherwise, there's no real way to do it, right?
No, and again, they'll say correlation is not causation. What we need is the scientists to come in and fill the gaps. I mean, look, we have a thesis that it's the vaccine that did all this. I'm 150 to 200% convinced, and as time goes on, the science follows behind. Wall Street. It's better to be directionally right than precisely wrong. That's why I'm proud of Wall Street. We were way ahead of everybody, and we just saw trends that disturbed us. And now scientists like Kevin McKernan are showing DNA contamination. There's all sorts of things going on scientifically. If we were to do autopsies, you could probably get at it that showed the vaccine. If there's a concurrent amount of spike protein in organs all over the place where it's not supposed to be, because they told us it stayed in your deltoid. Remember that?
Yeah. I remember. Yeah.
So the spike protein is sort of the identifier. Like if someone were to say, look, I'm 50 now, but I'm going to put in my will that I want a vaccine done to see if there was spike protein. That
an autopsy
exists? I'm sorry.
Well, yeah. Again, they claimed
it in my will. That's why I'm fucking asking that silly question.
They claimed that the spike protein left the body after a period of time, but they didn't test after 60 days. And there were reports
60
now
days?
Yeah. So there are reports now that, look, this is the hope I want to give. Not everybody's a spike protein factory. Some people are, others aren't. And, as a good rule of thumb, if you weren't like immediately vaccine injured, you're probably okay. If you didn't have like some sort of like adverse reaction, you're probably okay. And then the other thing is, the good news is you had to store this at minus 73 degrees. So wherever you got the shot administered, if they usually came in 5-dose vials. If they left it out on the counter for an hour, you got goop,
that's what we want.
Yeah. So this was administered by a bunch of untrained people. That's why so many people went into their veins, because people didn't know how to administer it into the deltoid, and that's why some people died right away when it hit a vein, and it was a disaster.
I'm smiling when he said that. I don't mean to be smiling. I'm just laughing at Jim's comment there. I just real quick, and I don't mean to beleaguer this, but they say people are single issue voters. This was my single issue, really. was the pandemic, the vaccine, and the way it was handled. And, again, a lot of people will say, well, Trump was the reason for, the Democrats wouldn't say it before, but what was that thing called? Operation Tornado, or what the hell it was called? Yeah, warp speed. Obviously, that was a Trump initiative. And you're a single issue voter. Why would you have voted for Trump?
It wasn't
because I wanted I wanted people to be held accountable. So I personally, I expected the Biden family preemptive pardons. They didn't shock me. The Fauci one was annoying to me. And it's not because I wanted to see it go directly to Anthony Fauci's front stoop, but I want people who are responsible for any sort of malfeasance with the pandemic or the vaccines to at least have some sort of accountability come to their doorstep. Is there anyone left, Ed, besides Fauci? Did that bother you as much as it did me?
That bothered me. I think, let's stay tuned on that one. There's also, Walensky, who was the head of this CDC. There's redacted, or not redacted, but there was some FOIA requests that showed that the Biden administration knew the vaccines were doing things that weren't good, and they hid it. So there's a lot of people. The Pfizer executives, their trial data. 1 in 800 adverse. The thing on safety alone should have been shut down, and it failed the all-cause mortality endpoint. That used to be the gold standard on pharma. Like, if you kill more people than you save, not approved.
Seems simple.
Approved.
But are they immune because of that emergency use loss?
That's how they got around it. They played games, and the endpoint that they went for was efficacy. All-cause mortality should always be an endpoint you kind of look at. That didn't come out. By the way, that didn't come out until a subsequent, FDA filing in November of 21. They tried to slip it under the radar that they had failed the all-cause mortality endpoint.
My God.
It's staggering. It's unbelievable. So I lost friends at the beginning because there was two things I said. Is that, first of all, they said it confers immunity. As soon as you get the vaccine, you're immune. And I got the one Johnson & Johnson shot. For some reason, Johnson & Johnson seems slightly more trustworthy than Pfizer, and I don't even know why that is. But they were like, okay, then you have 100% immunity, which they pretend like they didn't say like 2 months later. So I put out on social media, I said, so here's my question. If I have 100% immunity and my family does from this vaccine, why do I give a shit about anyone else getting it? And all of a sudden, that was a terrible question. And then the next question I asked was, okay, so if there's these breakthrough cases, which seems like an awful lot of them, and we are saying that is lowering your symptoms, isn't the chance of you remaining mobile with the disease with lowered symptoms that you perhaps confuse with seasonal allergies more going to spread this deadly pandemic more? Again, people didn't like those two questions. Seemed like valid questions to me, no?
Jim, you were just using your critical thinking skills, which was not
I should
allowed.
never do that.
It was not allowed. Such things like, I thought the purpose of a vaccine was to make you immune. Why do I care if you take it? Those questions were not allowed.
They're not allowed, clearly. God, what
it
a
was
crazy time.
It really was a strange time psychologically. I was a persona non grata, and then eventually people stopped bothering me, and then as time went, the big turning point for all of us was Omicron. When Omicron hit, it was such a mild variant, but everybody got sick, even the vaccinated people. That's kind of when we shifted. When people who weren't political or cared, they're like, "Why did I take this thing? It doesn't work. I'm out." That was just a simple. This doesn't work. I'm out. I'm done.
Yeah. But it's we just can't, the psychological hurdle. Like for me, it's easy to say, I took the vaccine, I felt pressure. One of the reasons I took it too is because I thought they're going to mandate it, and I wanted to be on the right side to fight those mandates. Not that I was worried about them myself, but I wanted to be like, no, I stand with those people. If you're going to try to round up people like they wanted to do in Australia, you can go fuck yourself. I'm with them. And I thought it would create a better standing for me if I had the vaccine. Terrible idea. But my question is, so psychologically, so many people can't say to themselves, I did the wrong thing. And they never will, right? They can't do it.
That's nuts to me. Go ahead.
It's nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're never going to get apologies from some of these people.
No, I mean individuals who
got the vaccine
and still think, no, it was the right thing to do. And they'll fight us on all this despite
I wish I never got it personally.
Yeah, me too.
And I say that all the time.
That's the majority of reasonable people. there's going to be this holdout cohort that is ideological, that can never admit they're wrong. We see them all the time on Wall Street. We've all met people who are the worst investors because they'll ride a trade into the ground because they can never let their ego.
That's really interesting.
I've always equated it to that. I've seen so many great managers, they get their ego invested too much into a stock and they ride it to zero because they can't admit they're wrong.
You just sort of identified the superpower. A lot of people won't want to hear this. The traders and investors have is being like, nope, wrong on this one. I'm out.
We're wrong. Yeah. We're wrong more than we're right. Yeah.
Early days on COVID, when I was doing what I had 16,000 followers. I was early days and I was posting stuff. The trading community agreed because they're like, hey, the very pragmatic people, I'm out. This is not
out.
I was wrong. I'm out. I've lost, I've lost 5%. This is bad. I'm out.
Yeah, I'm out. We don't even care if it reverses back the other way. I got out. That's it. I can get back in.
You walk away from the keyboard. I made my decision. I'm out. And that, the trading community I respect a lot of the trading FinTwit community. They were all over this.
Mm-hmm.
There were some, who are more punditry, who are in the media that didn't, who went along with this. And I don't harass them, but I don't follow them anymore. And I don't listen to them on anything.
What do you think? You obviously know RFK, or at least you got him to write the foreword of your book, which was great, by the way. By the way, weird thing to mention on the recording. I might send you my copy to get a signature from you, not RFK. What do you think he's actually going to be able to do? I know you're not in government. What do you think he's actually going to be able to do? What would you like to see him do?
Well, I think removing the 1986 immunity blanket for all vaccines would be fabulous, because then the market would, that's one way of getting rid of a lot of these vaccines. It's not necessarily banning them, letting the free market figure this out, because if you can be sued for what, your injuries, the risk reward to the company, so companies might pull on them. The mRNA will definitely be pulled. I mean, if they lose immunity, that thing's off the shelf tomorrow.
No doubt. Yeah.
I got into a Twitter argument with somebody and they called me anti-vax, and I'm like, I'm not anti-vax. I'm not this vax. And then finally I was like, fuck, call me whatever you want. I don't really care about these
I
words.
might actually be anti-vax.
Like that whole
now.
thing, they invent this word that is all of a sudden a slur.
Yeah.
I know. Well, listen, I worked on Bobby Kennedy's campaign for a bit, and he's a great guy. He's a lot of integrity. So he's going to do what he can within the realm of Trump world.
I can't believe I'm supportive of a Kennedy. I just think about my life arguing with my parents about Kennedys my whole life.
Look, there's been a lot of strange bedfellows this election cycle.
It's a strange time.
And what's going to be interesting is seeing some of the, this coming together to defeat communism. There'll be some infighting. We've already seen it. The HB1 visa fight. Vivek has, I guess, been kicked out of Trump world. I mean, this is what happens.
Yeah. And we like Vivek's been on the show too. We like him. I think he's a guy who says what he means. He says it in a kind and compassionate way. I hope that there's a spot for him if he comes back into Trump world. I don't know.
Well, I think he wants to run for Ohio governor.
Okay. He's announced it already. He's running for governor of Ohio, and I hope he wins it. And I don't know if we'll get him back on the show, but I'd like to get a governor on the show.
All right, we're bumping up against time. I would like this conversation to go on for about 4 hours, but our producer's got to get going. So thank you so much for being on. Can you tell the people where to find you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Dowd, Edward, D-O-W-D, Edward Getter, at Edward Dowd, D-O-W-D.
And is Phinance Technologies, that's just open to accredited investors? It's like a hedge fund. What is it?
Well, the hedge fund hasn't been seeded yet. We're still looking for the general partner. We came close at the end of last year, but they wanted to steal the company, so we told them to pound sand. Then we put it on the side for now because of the election cycle, but we're out marketing it again. Once we get seeded, that'll be out there. But right now, we put out a report for high net worth individuals, family offices, institutions, RIAs, insurance companies, you name it. It's the U.S. economic outlook for 2025, dangers of a deep worldwide recession. It's at our web homepage, financetechnologies.com with a PH.
Because
it's not cheap, but it's not cheap. But it's for institutional investors and people who want to convince their other colleagues, we got to start thinking about moving.
Cause unknown, the epidemic of sudden deaths in 2021 and 2022. I'm looking at it on Amazon. It's only $27 for the hardcover, and you should buy the hardcover because it's a good one to display on your shelf.
It's
Piss
a
your
good
liberal
coffee
neighbors
table
off.
book.
What's that?
Excellent. If you
Oh
want
yeah,
to
piss your
trust
neighbors
people
off.
all over.
They'll love that.
Right?
Yeah.
Also, I was going to tell you guys that my hearts go out to you, but I don't want to get in trouble like Elon Musk is in trouble now. So
That, right.
don't do it, Jimmy.
Yeah.
That's all they got right now is turning the Roman salute into a Nazi salute. That's all
There's
they
no
have on the
question
other
about
side.
it. It's crazy. Well, thank you. This has been a ton of fun. We so appreciate you being here. And on top of that, we appreciate you guys being with us. The support you guys give us is humbling. Thank you very much. Please support our sponsors, Hardcore Italians. The website is hysterical for the Italians in your life or the wannabes. And we've known plenty of those from the Italian neighborhoods we've been in our life. And also Independence Arc Meat. It is not that expensive and it is fabulous. I just had my leftover bone-in ribeye that I made on Sunday night about an hour ago, and it was unbelievable. My dog didn't even get any.
Jimmy.
What?
Eat the whole thing.